The night Jacob wrestled the angel. The night was heavier than most nights in Jacob's life, a kind of thick, waiting darkness that felt like it was pressing against his skin as he stood near the shallow bend of the Jabbok River. The wind barely moved. The water glided by with the quiet hush of someone afraid to disturb him, and every sound around him seemed to know something was coming. Jacob felt it too. He had felt it the whole day, a tension that started in his chest the moment he saw the horizon in the distance and imagined the shape of a familiar face, his brother Esau, the man he had not seen in 20 long years, the man who once vowed to kill him. Jacob had sent gifts ahead, waves of servants, herds of goats, rams, camels, cows, donkeys, enough generosity to soften even a hardened heart. He had sent his wives and children across the river for safety. Yet even after all of that, the fear did not leave him. It stayed, sitting behind his ribs, whispering the same question over and over again. What if Esau still hates me? What if the past hasn't died? The night stretched out around him, quiet but restless, like someone breathing beside him that he couldn't see. He sat on a smooth stone near the riverbank, elbows resting on his knees, fingers locked together. For a moment, he watched the reflection of the moon ripple on the water. It looked like a fragile thing, light broken by movement. It reminded him of himself, a life fractured by choices, mistakes, blessings, promises, and consequences. The camp behind him had gone silent, the last embers of the fire fading into a faint glow. The animals had settled. The children were asleep. Leah and Rachel were curled in separate tents across the river. Everything around him was resting, except him. Jacob felt like the whole world had gone still so it could watch what would happen to him tonight. He exhaled slowly and rubbed his face. God of my father Abraham, he whispered to the night air. God of my father Isaac, you said you would be with me. You said you would make my descendants like the sand of the sea. But right now, I feel alone. The words came out shaky, like they were carrying their own weight. He let them hang there in the dark, swallowed by the air, floating toward the heavens. He stood. Pacing helped him think. Each step crunched lightly on the dirt and grass, a rhythm for the thoughts swirling inside him. His mind replayed the past, the way he tricked Esau all those years ago, the bowl of stew, the blessing stolen with goatskins and whispered lies, the way Esau's voice cracked when he cried out, begging their father for another blessing. The memory still burned in his chest. He had spent years trying to outrun it, and now, suddenly, he couldn't run anymore. He crossed his arms tightly against himself, as if he could squeeze the fear out. The river whispered at his ankles. A chill crawled up his spine, and he turned around slowly, sensing movement. Not loud, not dramatic, just a presence. The kind of presence that makes every hair stand on end. Someone was there. Jacob's heart slammed once, hard enough to echo in his ears. A figure stood just at the edge of the dim moonlight. Not approaching, not speaking, just there, like it had been watching him for longer than he realized. Jacob straightened, muscles tightening instinctively. He didn't know who this person was, a stranger, an enemy, a thief, a scout sent by Esau, or something else entirely. The shape was tall, still, and completely unreadable. Jacob stepped forward. "Who are you?" The figure didn't answer. The night held its breath. Jacob felt something in him snap. Not fear, not anger, but that raw, desperate energy that comes when you've carried too many burdens for too long.
he lunged. The stranger moved just as fast, catching Jacob's arm, twisting, countering as if anticipating every motion. And just like that, the quiet night shattered into a struggle. The two of them slammed into the dirt, rolling, gripping, forcing each other back and forth with sudden, terrifying strength. Jacob didn't know who he fought, but he fought with every ounce of power in him, like his entire life depended on this one moment. His breath came in sharp bursts. The ground scraped his legs. The chill of the river hit his back as they tumbled closer to the water. The stranger was strong, too strong, stronger than any human Jacob had ever faced. Yet Jacob refused to let go. Something inside him, a lifetime of striving, surviving, wrestling with people, life, fate, and even God, pushed him forward. His fingers locked around the stranger's arms, gripping like iron. His feet dug into the dirt for leverage. The fight wasn't loud. It was desperate. Heavy breath, sliding feet, impact after impact as they grappled in the dark. The moon watched silently. Minutes passed, then hours. Sweat dripped down Jacob's face. His arms trembled, his lungs burned, but every time the stranger pushed him down, Jacob pushed back harder. Every time he felt himself slipping, he tightened his grip. This wasn't just a fight. It was the physical form of every fear and regret he had tried to run from. He didn't even realize when his knees began to shake or when his breaths turned ragged. He only knew he couldn't release his hold. He wouldn't. The stranger shifted suddenly, trying to break free. Jacob drove forward and pinned him to the earth for a moment, panting above him. The stranger's face was still hidden in shadow. He could feel his own pulse hammering loudly in his ears. Then the stranger spoke. Just one sentence, calm, steady, almost patient. "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." Jacob froze. The voice wasn't threatening. It wasn't pleading. It was simply stating a fact, like time itself was moving and this moment couldn't last forever. But Jacob's hold only tightened. "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The stranger didn't immediately respond. Jacob could feel the air shift, like the atmosphere itself changed temperature. The weight of the moment settled heavier around them. The wind suddenly stirred for the first time in hours, brushing past them as if carrying echoes of another world. "What is your name?" the stranger asked. "Jacob," he said through clenched teeth. There was a pause, not long, but deep. "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men and overcome." Jacob blinked. Struggled with God? Overcome? The meaning hit him slowly, as if the words had layers he wasn't ready to unpack. The realization dawned on him like the first light rising behind the hills. This wasn't just a man. This wasn't an enemy. This was a divine encounter disguised in earthly form. He stared at the figure, breath uneven. "Tell me your name," he whispered. The stranger shook his head gently. "Why do you ask my name?"
And then something happened. Not a bright burst of light, not a dramatic explosion, but something inward, something in the soul. A blessing that Jacob felt ripple through his bones and settle like fire under his heart. Suddenly, the fear that had been gripping him all day loosened its hold. Something inside him shifted. A strength, a reassurance, a sense of being seen and known completely. Then, the stranger touched Jacob's hip. Just a touch, and Jacob's leg buckled. He gasped,
collapsing forward as a sharp pain shot through him. His hip had been put out of joint with a single gentle tap. It wasn't done in anger. It wasn't punishment. It was something deeper. A mark. A reminder. Jacob clung to the stranger even as his leg screamed in pain, but the figure stepped back and slipped away, blending into the edges of the fading night as easily as mist dissolving in sunlight. The air grew still again. The river whispered. The world felt strangely lighter. Dawn peeled over the horizon, soft beams of gold brushing the hills. Jacob exhaled shakily, lowering himself onto a rock, his leg throbbing. The blessing still pulsed inside him. He felt exhausted, yet renewed, wounded, yet strengthened, broken, yet whole. He had feared facing Esau, but now something had changed. He wasn't the same man. The old Jacob, the deceiver, the runner, the one who always relied on his own cleverness, had wrestled in the night and didn't come out the same. He stood, leaning on his staff. The limp was immediate and permanent. Every step reminded him of the encounter. Every movement whispered, "You wrestled with God and lived." The sun climbed higher. His shadow stretched long behind him as he crossed the river to rejoin his family. The children ran toward him first. Leah noticed his limp. Rachel touched his arm gently, concern in her eyes. Jacob didn't explain. He didn't need to. The moment was too sacred, too deep for words. Then the stranger saw Esau approaching from the distance. The last time he saw that face, it was twisted with fury. Now it was older, fuller, carrying years of life Jacob had never witnessed. Jacob's stomach tightened, not because of fear, but because of the immensity of what was about to happen. He limped forward, bowing low, once, twice, 7 times, a sign of humility, a sign that the years had changed him, a sign that he came not as a trickster, but as a man transformed. Esau stopped. For a moment, nothing moved. Then Esau ran to him, not with anger, not with revenge, but with open arms. He embraced Jacob, pulling him close, burying his face against his brother's shoulder. Jacob felt the breath leave his lungs not from pain, but from relief strong enough to bring tears to his eyes. The brothers held each other as the years dissolved between them. The past didn't vanish, but it no longer ruled them. When they finally stepped apart, Esau looked down at Jacob's limp. "What happened to you?" Jacob smiled softly. "I met someone last night." Esau frowned, confused, but didn't press. As the sun climbed higher and the camp awoke fully, Jacob glanced toward the place beside the river where he had wrestled in the dark. He knew that spot would forever be sacred to him, not because he was injured there, but because he was remade there. The man who limped into the new day was not the same man who had walked into the night. He had wrestled with God. He had held on when everything in him felt like letting go. He had been touched, blessed, renamed, transformed. And the limp was not a weakness, it was proof. Jacob walked beside Esau, his uneven step purposeful. Behind him came his wives, his children, his flocks. Before him stretched a future he no longer feared. The world seemed different now, softer somehow, brighter, as if the early morning light had reached inside him and pushed away the shadows that had lived there for years. The river behind him whispered its steady song, as if honoring the memory of the night it had witnessed. And the wind, quiet all night, now moved freely through the trees, carrying with it a sense of peace Jacob had not felt in a long, long time. He didn't know everything that lay ahead. He didn't know all the challenges still waiting in his path, but for the first time, he felt ready to face them. Not with fear, not with running, but with the quiet strength of a man who had wrestled in the dark and stepped into the morning with a blessing. His name was Jacob when he entered the night. His name was Israel when he walked into the dawn. And the limp that followed him for the rest of his life was never a mark of defeat. It was the echo of a divine encounter. A reminder that sometimes the struggle is the place where God meets us, shapes us, and prepares us for the sunrise just beyond the shadows. And as the day unfolded gently around him, Jacob walked forward, slowly, steadily, with a heart that finally knew peace.
The fall of Jericho. The sun rose slowly over the hills of Canaan, spreading a golden haze across the land like a promise that something was about to change. The valley below trembled with the heat of the morning, though no one noticed it yet. In the distance, the city of Jericho rested high upon its fortified walls, its stones baked hard in the relentless sun, its streets silent, its people complacent, unaware that their time of peace was about to shatter. Joshua and the Israelites stood across the river from the city, looking up at the massive walls that had stood for centuries. Fear had visited him briefly when he first set eyes on the city, a creeping chill in his chest. But that fear quickly gave way to a steady certainty, a quiet confidence that came from a voice far greater than his own, a promise that had been whispered to him over years of wandering. The Israelites were weary from the journey through the desert. Their feet were sore, their water skins often empty, their stomachs yearning for the comfort of fresh bread and fruit. Yet here they were, standing before a city that seemed impenetrable, its walls daunting, its gates strong. The scouts had returned with the same report. Jericho was fortified like a fortress, its people alert, its defenses formidable. Even the spies who had walked its streets in disguise spoke of the soldiers, the watchmen, the tension that hummed like a drum under the bright sun. And there it was, the conflict. It didn't take long to appear. The Israelites could see the enemy through the distance, hear the distant clanging of weapons, the low murmur of people confident in their stronghold. The air felt thick, heavy with the knowledge that they could not simply march in and take the city by force. They had tried that before, in other battles, and had learned that human strength alone was not enough. Joshua closed his eyes for a moment, letting the noise and the tension fall away. He listened instead to the memory of the voice that had called him from the wilderness, the voice that had said, "I have given Jericho into your hands. The city and all its people belong to you." The words settled deep in his chest like a drumbeat, not loud, not forceful, but undeniable, certain. And yet, Joshua could not ignore the fear altogether. He could not ignore the weight of leading thousands of people into a city whose walls had never been breached. He thought of the scouts and their trembling voices, of the way Jericho seemed alive with confidence, of the sun reflecting off its high towers, and thinking, how can something so solid, so immense, fall? He lifted his head. Around him, the Israelites murmured, their nerves taut. Families clutched at one another, soldiers adjusted their weapons, and the priests carried the Ark of the Covenant,
the golden chest that carried God's presence among them. The ark would lead the way, a reminder that they did not fight alone, that the battle belonged first and foremost to the Lord. Joshua stepped forward, raising his hands. "Hear me," he said, and even in the distant heat his voice carried clearly. "For 7 days we shall walk around the city, once each day with the ark in front of us, and on the 7th day we will march around it 7 times. The priests will blow their trumpets, and then the walls will fall. The Lord has promised this, and we will not doubt." The plan was simple, yet it seemed impossible. The people exchanged nervous glances. Some whispered, wondering how mere walking and the sound of trumpets could overcome walls that had resisted armies for generations. But the older men, those who had followed Joshua through deserts and trials, nodded quietly, remembering the miracles they had witnessed, the waters parted, the manna falling like dew, the enemies turned away by the hand of God. And so the first day began. The priests took their places, the ark was lifted, and the people moved in a slow, deliberate line around Jericho. Each step was measured, careful. The sound of the trumpets echoed off the stone walls, low and steady. And yet, nothing seemed to happen. The city remained silent. The walls did not tremble. The gates did not shake. Some of the younger men began to fidget, questioning the plan, glancing nervously at the fortified towers, imagining the soldiers ready to repel them if they tried to force their way in. But Joshua did not waver. His eyes remained fixed on the city, his hands steady on his staff. He reminded the people quietly, firmly, "The Lord goes before us. His word is our sword. Our strength is in faith, not in our hands." So they continued, around and around the city, day after day, the sun climbing higher each time, the heat pressing down on them. 7 days passed, and each day the city watched, bemused, confused, confident that nothing could challenge them. The soldiers laughed quietly behind the walls, mocking the Israelites' slow procession. The priests' trumpets blared, steady and unyielding, but it sounded almost comical, almost human in its futility. And yet, in the midst of this, the people of Israel began to feel something. Not a trembling wall, not a cracking stone, but a quiet certainty that built with each step, a feeling that they were participating in something much greater than themselves, something invisible yet palpable. Their hearts began to lift, their nerves steadied, their fear replaced with a quiet anticipation. On the 7th day, everything changed. Before dawn, Joshua summoned the people. "Today the Lord will show his power," he said, his voice calm, resolute. "Today the city will fall, not by sword, not by siege, but by the hand of God. Prepare yourselves." The people obeyed. They lined up, the priests carrying the ark in the lead, trumpets poised, feet ready, and then they began. 7 times they walked around Jericho, slowly, deliberately, the people moving like a river in the shadow of the massive walls. Every time the trumpets blew, the sound rolled across the city like thunder, low and insistent, filling the streets, echoing off towers, rattling windows, vibrating the very stones. Inside Jericho, panic began to stir. The soldiers had mocked at first, but now a quiet unease settled among them. They could hear the trumpets, the steps, the rhythm that seemed impossible to ignore. They looked at the procession below and realized they did not understand it, could not comprehend it. Something in the air had shifted. Something unseen had entered the city.
And then, at the seventh circuit, when the people had completed the seventh march, Joshua raised his voice. "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." The shout rose from the Israelites like a wave breaking over the riverbanks, full and strong, carrying years of hope, fear, and faith. And the walls responded, not with gradual crumbling, not with hesitation, but with a sudden, violent collapse, as if the stone itself had been waiting only for that moment to fall. Towers tumbled, gates splintered, the massive stones rolling like a river of gray, dust rising high into the sky, filling the air with the scent of rubble and earth, a scent that stung in the nostrils and filled the ears with the sound of a world being remade. The people did not hesitate. With the walls fallen, they surged forward, not with mindless rage, not with unnecessary cruelty, but with a sense of purpose, of destiny, of obedience. The city was taken, the promise fulfilled, and the miracle was undeniable. Amidst the rubble, the Israelites spared Rahab and her family, remembering her faith, her courage, the scarlet cord that had hung in her window as a sign. They left her untouched, bringing her and her household into the midst of the people, a quiet symbol of God's mercy amidst the chaos of victory. Joshua stood among them, surveying the fallen city, the dust swirling at their feet, the people trembling with awe and wonder. The Israelites were not the same as when they had begun the march. Their fear had been replaced with faith, their doubt with certainty. They had seen the impossible, witnessed the power of God, and walked through the echo of a promise fulfilled. The sun climbed higher, illuminating the ruins of Jericho, the stones scattered like sand across the valley. And in the quiet that followed, the Israelites realized something profound. Walls may be high, enemies may be strong, and fear may linger in the heart, but when God acts, the impossible is made real. The earth itself can shift, the stones can tumble, and the faithful can stand in the midst of victory that they did not build with their hands. Joshua called the people together. "Remember this day," he said. "Remember how the Lord has fought for you. Remember that faith is stronger than fear, and obedience is stronger than doubt. Let this victory guide you through the years to come." And as the people gathered, celebrating, giving thanks, carrying their families and possessions, and looking at the remnants of Jericho, there was a quiet understanding among them all. Miracles do not always announce themselves with thunder or fire. Sometimes miracles begin with faith, patience, and the courage to follow a divine plan even when the world seems unmoving. The city lay silent, broken, reclaimed by God's hand, a monument not to human might, but to the invisible power that moves mountains and crumbles walls, that honors the obedient, strengthens the faithful, and fulfills promises in the fullness of time. And in the hearts of the Israelites, the memory of Jericho would linger forever, the day they marched in faith, shouted with all their strength, and watched the walls fall, not by human hands, but by the hand of God Himself.
It had been years now,
3 long, quiet, weary years without a single drop falling from the sky. And in those years, the people had grown nervous, unsettled, desperate. Livestock wandered thin and slow, wells dipped lower every month. The trees looked like they were holding their breath. And somewhere deep inside the nation's heart, a quiet fear had bloomed. Fear that maybe the sky had closed, maybe heaven had turned its face away. In that dryness, in that cracking silence, the conflict had already settled, thick and heavy, like dust on abandoned ground. King Ahab ruled Israel, but it was not his voice the people truly followed. His wife, Jezebel, fierce and fiery, had brought with her the worship of Baal, an idol god of storms and rain. And when she arrived, with her priests and her shrines and her loud ceremonies, the people had drifted toward her faith like thirsty travelers chasing a mirage. They bowed, they sacrificed, they pleaded for rain from a God who made promises but never delivered. And in the middle of this spiritual drought, just as real as the physical one, there was one man who refused to bow. A man who walked with a strange, quiet certainty. A man named Elijah. His first confrontation had already come years earlier when he stood in Ahab's court and declared that no rain would fall except at his word. That moment had been like dropping a stone into still water. The ripples were still spreading across the nation, still shaking the hearts of the people. Jezebel hated him. Ahab feared him. The people whispered about him like he was a storm cloud walking on 2 legs, unpredictable and powerful, carrying something no one else could explain. But Elijah had been gone for years now, vanished, hidden in remote places, fed by ravens, kept alive beside drying streams, sheltered in the quiet home of a widow whose flour never ran out. While Israel suffered, Elijah was being shaped by silence. While Israel bowed to Baal, Elijah learned to stand alone. And while the people begged the sky for rain, Elijah learned how to hear the whisper of God. Now the time had come. The drought was still heavy, the air full of tension, the king growing more restless by the day. And as Elijah walked toward Mount Carmel, dust kicking softly beneath his sandals, he knew that the moment ahead of him would not only decide Israel's future, it would unveil which God truly held the sky. The sun was already high when Elijah approached the mountain. Ahab was there, waiting, surrounded by guards and priests. The king's face was a blend of frustration, weariness, and bitterness. He had searched for Elijah everywhere, across nations, through deserts, among foreign kings. He thought Elijah had caused the drought, not realizing Elijah had only delivered the message. When Ahab saw him, the king's voice cut through the air sharply. "Is that you, you troubler of Israel?" Elijah didn't raise his voice. He didn't bristle or retreat. His tone remained soft, even, steady, like a man who was not impressed by power nor intimidated by it. "I have not troubled Israel," he replied quietly, "but you have, and your father's house, because you have abandoned the commands of the Lord and followed Baal." That answer hung in the air with surprising weight. Even the guards shifted uncomfortably. The priests muttered beneath their breath.
Elijah wasn't being loud or confrontational. He simply spoke truth with the calmness of someone who trusted the one who sent him. Then Elijah did something unexpected. He issued a challenge. "Send and gather all Israel to me on Mount Carmel. Bring the 450 prophets of Baal. Let them come." Ahab hesitated, uncertain, but something about Elijah's presence, his steadiness, his certainty, made the king obey. Messengers rode out, summoning people from every direction. Soon Mount Carmel was crowded. Men, women, children, elders, they all climbed the slopes, curious, hopeful, anxious. The drought had made everyone desperate, and if there was even a whisper of rain in the future, they wanted to be present for the first sign. Elijah stood alone on one side, a solitary figure with sun-darkened skin, simple clothing, and eyes that carried more peace than the moment deserved. Across from him stood a sea of prophets, Baal's priests, dressed in colorful garments, chanting, drumming, waving their ritual instruments. The contrast was striking. No one had ever seen anything like this. One quiet man facing hundreds. The people murmured, some shuffling nervously, others leaning forward with expectation. The conflict was no longer hidden. It stood boldly on the mountaintop. It was Israel caught between two gods, Elijah caught between truth and an entire nation, and heaven itself poised to speak. Elijah stepped forward. His voice, though gentle, carried easily across the crowd. "How long will you waver between two opinions?" he asked. "If the Lord is God, follow him. If Baal is God, follow him." The crowd became still. No one answered. Their silence was like a wound, proof that fear had taken deeper root than they wanted to admit. Elijah continued, "I am the only prophet of the Lord left, but Baal's prophets are many. Let 2 bulls be given. Let the prophets of Baal choose one for themselves. Cut it, lay it on wood, and call on the name of their God, but let no one place fire beneath it." He paused, letting the people settle into the weight of the moment. Then he continued, "I will prepare the other bull and call on the name of the Lord, and the God who answers by fire, he is God." A hush washed over the mountaintop. The challenge was simple, bold, and terrifying. Fire from heaven was no small request. The people looked from Elijah to the priests of Baal and back again. "It is good," they said finally. "Let it be as you say." The prophets of Baal moved quickly, choosing their bull, preparing the altar, arranging wood, and beginning their rituals. Their voices rose into the sky, loud, passionate, desperate. They shouted Baal's name. They danced around the altar. Their movements were wild, frantic. Dust rose around their feet, swirling like the spirits they were trying to summon. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. Elijah watched quietly from a distance, leaning slightly on his staff. He didn't interrupt. He didn't mock at first. He simply observed with the calm patience of someone who knew the outcome before the challenge began. But midday came, and still no fire, no spark, no sign, no whisper from the heavens. Finally, Elijah stepped forward, his voice carrying a gentle edge of dry humor. the kind that made some of the crowd suppress small, weary smiles. "Cry louder," he suggested softly, "for he is a god, is he not? Perhaps he is deep in thought, or traveling, or asleep." It wasn't cruel, it wasn't angry, it was simply a reminder to the priests, to the people, to the sky, that no matter how much noise humans make, nothing can awaken a god who does not exist. The priests of Baal grew more frantic. They shouted until their voices cracked. They cut themselves with knives until their blood spilled across their skin. Their dancing grew more desperate, more chaotic, more painful to watch. Hours slipped by, and still the sky remained quiet, untouched. The people shifted uneasily now. The tension in the air had changed. It no longer felt like a battle between two gods, but like a battle between noise and silence, between emptiness and truth, between human desperation and divine absence. And in the middle of this spiritual drought, just as real as the physical one, there was one man who refused to bow.
Elijah finally stepped forward. "Come to me," he said softly. The people gathered around him, drawing closer. The sound of their footsteps on the dusty ground filled the quiet. Elijah's movements were slow and deliberate as he reached for stones, 12 of them, one for each tribe of Israel. He didn't rush, he didn't posture. He built the altar gently, like someone repairing something precious rather than constructing something new. As he placed each stone, a strange calm settled over the mountaintop. The chaos of Baal's frenzy faded into memory. Elijah's quietness felt heavier than the noise that had come before. He laid the wood neatly. He cut the bull with steady hands. Then he dug a trench around the altar. The people watched in confusion as Elijah did something completely unexpected. He asked for water in a drought, in a land that had not seen rain in years. Water was precious, rare, almost sacred. But Elijah told them to bring jars and pour the water over the sacrifice. They poured once. He told them to pour again. They poured twice. He told them to pour a third time. The water soaked everything: the bull, the wood, the altar, the stones. It flowed down and filled the trench until it shimmered like a small pool beneath the altar. The people stared in disbelief. Fire couldn't possibly ignite this now. It was impossible. But Elijah wasn't preparing for possibility. He was preparing for God. When everything was ready, Elijah stepped forward. His voice didn't rise. He didn't shout. He didn't chant. He simply lifted his face toward the sky and prayed with a softness that felt like a whisper in a quiet room. "Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God, that I am your servant, and that I have done all of this at your command. Answer me, Lord, so these people will know that you are God, and that you are turning their hearts back to you." He finished speaking. There was no long pause, no dramatic buildup, no rolling thunder. Just a moment of pure, breath-held stillness. Then the fire came. It fell from the sky with a quiet, breathtaking intensity. It wasn't wild or violent. It was focused, intentional, like the touch of a hand that knew exactly where to land. The flames consumed the sacrifice instantly, then the wood, then the stones, then the water,
licking up every last drop from the trench until nothing remained but the impression of where the altar had once stood. The people gasped, some falling to their knees, others covering their mouths. It wasn't just fire, it was truth made visible. It was God answering with a whisper made of flame. Elijah didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout triumphantly. He simply stood in the glow of what God had done. The people began to cry out, not in frenzy like the prophets of Baal, but in awe, in trembling reverence, in humbled realization. The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. The conflict that had stretched across years of drought, across the hearts of the people, across the mountaintop itself, finally ended. Ahab watched from a distance, his face unreadable. Fear, awe, confusion, recognition, they all flickered across his eyes. And Elijah walked to him with that same steady calm. "Go," Elijah said softly, "eat and drink, for there is the sound of heavy rain." Rain. The word lingered in the air like a fragile hope, like a promise almost too good to believe. Ahab rode off, confused and hungry, while Elijah climbed higher up the mountain, lowering his face to the ground in quiet prayer. 7 times he sent his servant to look toward the sea. 6 times the servant returned shaking his head. There was nothing. The sky was an unbroken dome of silence. But Elijah stayed in prayer. He stayed in the quiet. He stayed in the certainty that the God who answered with fire would answer with rain. And then, on the 7th time, the servant returned with a voice full of wonder. "There is a cloud, a small cloud no larger than a man's hand." Elijah lifted his head, a soft smile touching his lips. "Go tell Ahab," he said gently, "prepare your chariot before the rain stops you." The sky darkened, the wind shifted, and the scent of moisture, real, unmistakable, glorious, filled the dry air. Then the rain fell. Not softly at first, but with the pent-up power of years withheld. It poured over the land, over the stones, over the people who lifted their faces in relief and astonishment. The water soaked the soil, ran down the hills, filled the streams, revived the earth. And Elijah, strengthened by the Spirit of God, tucked his cloak into his belt and ran ahead of Ahab's chariot all the way to Jezreel, his steps steady, sure, powerful. In the end, it wasn't the fire that stayed with the people. It was the rain, the sound of it, the relief of it, the reminder that the God who answers in power also answers in mercy. And sometimes the loudest miracles begin with the quiet faith of one man who dares to trust him.
The night he asked for his inheritance, the oil lamps were still burning in the courtyard, their small flames trembling in the evening breeze. Crickets sang in the fields beyond the stone wall. The air smelled of crushed olives and warm dust, the familiar scent of home. Yet inside the young man's chest, everything was restless, storming, aching for distance. He stood in the shadow of a fig tree, fingers clenched and unclenched at his sides, rehearsing the words he had already decided to speak. The house before him was strong and quiet, built by his grandfather's hands. Inside, his father and older brother were finishing the evening meal.
The younger son could hear the low murmur of their voices, the scrape of bowls, the soft rhythm of a life that had always felt too small for his widening hunger. He stepped forward. His father looked up when he entered, eyes warm and tired in the lamplight. "You're late," he said gently. "Come, eat. There's still bread." The young man swallowed. The words rushed out before courage had time to flee. "Father, give me my share of the estate, the portion that will belong to me one day." The room went quiet. Even the lamps seemed to hold their breath. His older brother froze mid-motion, bread halfway to his mouth, eyes narrowing slowly. The father did not speak at once. He simply looked at his younger son, looked at him the way only a parent can, as though seeing both the child he had once carried on his shoulders and the man now standing before him with fire in his eyes and impatience in his bones. To ask for inheritance while one's father still lived was to ask, in essence, for his death. It was to say, "I wish you were gone." The older brother's chair scraped harshly against the stone floor. "Have you lost your mind?" he spat. "You would tear this family apart for your wandering dreams." But the younger son did not look at him. He looked only at his father, his jaw set, fear and longing tangled together. The father's shoulders sagged as though a great weight had settled there. A long silence passed. Then, quietly, he said, "So you wish to go?" The young man nodded, unable to trust his voice. The father rose without anger, without accusation. He placed a hand briefly on the table, as though steadying himself, and walked out into the dark. Days passed after that in a strange hush. The estate was divided, fields were measured, accounts were tallied, silver was counted into small canvas bags, servants moved carefully, whispers following them like shadows. The older brother refused to look at the younger one. Their mother wept behind closed doors, and the father, he moved through each day with a calm that hurt more than fury ever could. On the morning of his departure, the younger son slung his bag over his shoulder, the weight of the coins pressed against his back, solid and real, the price of every reckless freedom he had imagined. The courtyard was quiet, except for the soft lowing of cattle and the rustle of palm leaves in the dawn breeze. His father stood by the gate. For a moment, the young man almost turned back. He almost dropped the bag at his feet and said, "I was wrong." But pride stiffened his spine. He shifted his weight and said only, I'll send word." His father stepped forward and pulled him into an embrace. The young man stiffened in surprise. His father's arms were strong but trembling. His beard brushed against his cheek like familiar wool. The father said nothing, no warning, no plea, only held him longer than was comfortable, as though memorizing the feel of him. Then he released him. The younger son walked down the road without looking back. At first, the world felt endlessly wide. He traveled to a distant land where voices were strange and markets dazzled with color and noise. The smell of spiced wine and roasting meat filled the air. Music spilled from doorways into the streets. He laughed freely there, surrounded by quick friends and quicker pleasures. Silver flowed from his pouch as easily as water. People praised his generosity. Joy seemed constant, effortless, until the silver ran out. The friends drifted away first, one by one, like smoke when the fire dies. Doors that had once been wide open now closed quietly in his face. The laughter stopped coming for him. He sold his cloak, then his sandals, then finally his pride. A famine swept through the land. The fields turned brittle and brown. Markets stood nearly empty. The few coins he had left vanished in days. Hunger hollowed his cheeks. His ribs began to show beneath his threadbare tunic. When he could no longer beg without shame burning in his throat, he hired himself out to a stranger who owned pigs. Every morning, before the sun lifted the mist, he trudged into the fields with a slop bucket in his hands. The animals crowded around him, snorting and pushing, their wet noses nudging his legs. The smell of rot and mud clung to him. His stomach growled so fiercely it hurt. Often he watched the pigs eat and thought how even they were fed better than he. One evening, as he crouched beside the trough, too weak to swat away the flies gathering at his face, clarity struck him like a whisper in the ribs of his soul. How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare? He murmured aloud, voice hoarse, and here I am, perishing with hunger. The words fell into the dirt like seeds. He sat back on his heels and stared at the fading sky. The shame came then, heavy as stone. He had not only wasted his father's wealth, he had wounded his heart. He pressed his palms into his eyes until he saw sparks. I am no longer worthy to be called your son, he whispered into the quiet fields. Make me like one of your hired servants. That night, beneath a cold scattering of stars, he began the long walk home. Each step felt heavier than the last. His feet blistered and bled. The road stretched endlessly beneath his worn sandals. Dust coated his hair and skin until he scarcely recognized himself. With every mile, new doubts whispered in his mind. What if his father had died in grief? What if the doors were closed forever? What if the brother who despised him met him at the gate? Yet the words he had practiced rose again and again in his thoughts like a prayer. Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. Days passed, hunger gnawed, night winds chilled his bones. At last, one quiet morning, thin and trembling with exhaustion, he stood at the crest of a familiar hill and looked down upon the valley of his childhood. The stone walls, the olive trees, the roofs catching soft sunlight. Home. He faltered, heart pounding so loudly he feared it would give him away. He took a step forward, then another, descending slowly as though approaching a dream that might shatter if touched too quickly. On the far end of the yard, his father was standing where he often stood in the mornings, watching the road. He saw the figure at a distance, a ragged shape, bent and slow, dirty, unfamiliar. For a heartbeat, he did not know who it was. Then something in the walk, something in the tilt of the head struck his memory like a bell. His breath caught. He did not walk, he ran. Servants gasped as their master lifted the hem of his robe and broke into a run across the courtyard. His feet pounded stone and dust. The morning air rushed into his lungs in sharp gulps. He did not slow, did not hesitate, did not wait for certainty. The son saw him coming and faltered, stunned. The rehearsed speech trembled on his lips. The father reached him and wrapped his arms around him with a force born of months of sorrow and hope tangled together. The young man's bones ached beneath the embrace, but he did not pull away. He buried his face in his father's shoulder and wept. "I have sinned against heaven and against you," he sobbed. "I am no longer worthy to be called your son." The father scarcely seemed to hear. He called out over his son's shoulder, voice ringing with every ounce of life left in him. "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet." Servants rushed forward in disbelief. One draped fine fabric over the filth-caked shoulders. Another slipped a ring onto his trembling hand. Someone knelt to fasten new sandals on his broken feet. The father cupped his son's face between his hands, eyes shining. "This my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." Music rose in the courtyard by afternoon. The fattened calf was slaughtered, bread baked, wine flowed. Laughter returned to walls that had long heard only quiet waiting. Servants danced, voices lifted in song. The aroma of roasted meat drifted into the fields. The older brother was returning from the far pasture when he heard it. Music, dancing, a feast. Confused, he called to one of the servants. "What is happening?" The servant's face was alight. "Your brother has returned. Your father has killed the fattened calf because he has received him back safe and sound." The older brother stopped in the road. The words seemed to echo without meaning for several long breaths. Then anger surged up his spine like fire. He did not go in. He stood outside the gate, jaw locked, fists clenched, watching light and joy spill from a house he felt had never known his weariness. After a while, his father noticed his absence and came out to him beneath the early evening sky. "Come," said the father softly, "join us." The older son's voice broke loose with years of simmering pain. "All these years I've served you. I never disobeyed you once. You never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours comes back, after wasting your property, you kill the fattened calf for him?" The father stepped closer. The music drifted through the open gate behind him. Lantern light glowed along the courtyard walls. "My son," he said gently, "you are always with me. Everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate. Your brother was dead, and now he lives. He was lost, and now he is found." The words hung between them, rich and heavy with truth. Inside, the younger son sat at the long table, wrapped in clean linen, his hands shaking as he lifted bread to his mouth. Each bite felt unreal, safe. His father sat beside him, smiling as though the sun itself burned in his chest. Across the yard, hidden just beyond the light, the older brother stood alone, wrestling with a mercy that did not yet feel fair. The night deepened, the stars turned slowly overhead, and the house, once quiet with grief, now pulsed with life. Not because a son had earned his way back, but because a father's love had never left the road. And even as the last notes of music drifted into the dark fields, that love still waited, wide as the night, steady as the rising dawn, ready to bring the lost home again.
Crossing the Red Sea. Moses stood at the edge of the camp, his staff planted in the sand, his robe snapping softly in the restless night breeze. Before him stretched the Red Sea, wide, black, endless. Moonlight scattered across its surface like trembling silver. The water heaved and whispered against itself, steady and unconcerned with the terror of men. Behind him, the people of Israel gathered in anxious knots, families clinging together, children half asleep and frightened, elders staring wide-eyed into the dark. Their freedom had lasted only a handful of days. Only days ago they had walked out of Egypt with songs on their lips, with borrowed silver and gold in their packs, with the smell of roasted lamb still clinging to their clothes. Only days ago they had watched the land of their bondage crack beneath the final blow of God's power. The mighty had fallen, the proud had wept, and Pharaoh himself had ordered them gone. But now, Pharaoh's heart had turned once more. A young boy named Eliab pressed his face into his mother's skirt, his small fingers trembling. "Mama," he whispered, voice shaking, "why is everyone crying again? Are the bad soldiers coming?" His mother, Tirzah, knelt and pulled him close. Her eyes were red with dust and tears. "The Lord will protect us," she said softly, though her own voice quivered, "just like he did in Egypt." But fear has a way of speaking louder than memory. Shouts broke from the far edge of the camp, where watchmen stood on the rocky rise. "Dust!" one cried. "Dust from the west!" The sound rolled like thunder through the people. A man dropped his water skin. A woman gasped. Somewhere a baby began to wail. "They're coming," someone breathed. "Pharaoh's army!" Panic spread like fire and dry brush. Families scrambled. Bundles were dragged. People pushed and stumbled in the sand. The sea blocked their path forward. The mountains hemmed them in on both sides, and behind them, death on chariots. A man named Abner shoved through the crowd toward Moses, his face twisted with fury and terror. "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you dragged us out here to die?" he shouted. Others joined him, their voices rising in bitter chorus. "We told you to leave us alone. It would have been better to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." Moses turned to face them. The torchlight flickered across his weathered face, lined from years of desert sun and sorrow. For a moment he felt the weight of every life before him, every fear, every accusation, every trembling child. He felt his own fear too, deep and sharp. The sea did not part at his command. The army did not pause at his word. He was a servant, not a master of miracles. And yet, the God who had called him from fire had never failed him. His voice rose, steady and strong despite the storm inside his chest. "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only be still." The words seemed to hover in the air, fragile as glass and powerful as thunder. That night, as the first distant rumble of chariots reached the ears of the people, Moses turned away from the crowd and walked alone to the water's edge.
The sand was cool beneath his feet. The sea whispered secrets only God could understand. He lifted his face to the sky, dark and endless. "Lord," he prayed, voice breaking, "you brought us here. You led us with fire and cloud. Do not abandon these people now. They're afraid, and so am I." Behind him, fires flickered, mothers hushed children, men clutched walking staffs and useless weapons. Every heart waited for dawn in the shadow of destruction. Then the wind began to rise. At first, it was only a breath across the surface of the water, a faint stirring barely noticed, but it grew. The air pressed harder, colder, sharper. Sand lifted in thin curls. Tents strained at their ropes. The sea shuddered. Moses lifted his staff as the voice of God spoke within his spirit, unmistakable as thunder in his bones. He stretched his arm out over the water, and the wind answered. All through the night, the east wind roared. It howled across the sea like a living force, pushing with relentless divine power. The waters began to draw back, trembling, folding in on themselves. Waves reared and were flung aside. The seabed, hidden since the world began to breathe air for the first time. Walls of water rose on either side, towering, dark and glistening under the moon. The wind dried the path between them, leaving a wide corridor of packed sand and stone. The sea stood parted, trembling like a held breath. At the edge of the crowd, Tirzah felt the wind tear at her headscarf. She lifted her face and stared. "Mama," Eliab whispered, eyes huge with wonder. "The sea, what is it doing?" She had no words, only tears as she clutched his hand. Moses turned and lifted his voice once more. "Go forward." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then one old man stepped out onto the seabed. His sandals struck dry ground where water had ruled just moments before. Then a woman followed, then a family, and suddenly the people surged forward like a living river of faith and fear tangled together. They walked between walls of water that loomed on either side, vast and trembling, lit by moonlight and fire. Fish flashed in the depths, trapped in liquid prisons on either side. The roar of the wind filled their ears so completely that it felt as though the world itself were breathing. Eliab stumbled as he walked, staring at the shifting shapes in the water beside him. A silver fish darted past his face, close enough to touch. "Mama," he cried in awe, "the sea is standing up." Tirzah squeezed his hand. "Yes, my son, the Lord is holding it back for us." Some walked in stunned silence, others wept openly. A few fell to their knees in the sand, unable to move for sheer wonder. The pillar of fire that had guided them in the night moved behind them now, sliding between the people and the approaching army like a blazing wall. The Egyptians drew near, but could not pass through its consuming light. And yet, they chased nonetheless. Pharaoh drove his men forward with fury burning in his chest. He had watched the slaves walk out with his wealth, with his pride, with his labor, and his heart had hardened again like stone beneath the sun. "After them!" he roared, voice cracking with rage. "They will not escape me." The fire lifted. The path through the sea lay open before them. The first chariots thundered onto the seabed. The ground that had felt firm beneath the feet of the Israelites now trembled and groaned. Wheels sank strangely into the sand. Horses screamed in confusion as the towering walls of water closed in above them. Soldiers shouted in terror. "This is not right," one cried. "The Lord fights for them." But Pharaoh would not turn back. At the far shore, as the last of the Israelites stumbled onto dry ground, Moses stood watching the distant chaos unfold within the sea's corridor. The people clustered behind him, sobbing, praising, trembling, laughing through tears they did not understand. Eliab pointed. "Mama, the bad soldiers are in the sea now." Tirzah could only whisper, "Lord, have mercy." Then God spoke once more to Moses. He lifted his staff. Slowly, solemnly, he stretched his arm over the sea again. For a moment, the wind hesitated. The walls of water quivered. Then the breath of God released what he had been holding. With a sound like the tearing of the earth itself, the waters collapsed. The waves rushed back into their place with unstoppable force. Chariots shattered. Horses vanished beneath the surge. Soldiers cried out once and were heard no more. The fury of the deep swallowed the fury of men. Morning light rose over quiet water. The sun crept above the horizon, pale and gentle, touching the sea with gold as if nothing extraordinary had happened at all. The wind fell silent. The shore lay scattered with broken armor and fragments of chariots, mute witnesses to the night's judgment. On the far side, the people of Israel stood in stunned stillness. Then a single voice lifted in trembling song. "I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted." It was Miriam, Moses' sister, her face wet with tears and blazing with joy. She lifted a tambourine that still bore scratches from Egypt and struck it with trembling hands. Women gathered around her, voices rising, feet dancing in the sand as the song rushed through the camp like life through dry bones. "The Lord is my strength and my song. He has become my salvation." Men wept openly now. Elders fell to their knees. Children laughed and danced and stared across the sea in silent wonder. The fear that had once ruled them was washed away by awe. Tirzah lifted Eliab into her arms as the singing swelled around them. "Do you see, my son?" she whispered into his hair. "This is the God who walks with us." Eliab watched the sunrise with wide, unblinking eyes. "Will the sea ever stand up again?" he asked softly. She smiled through tears. For him, anything is possible. Moses stood apart, leaning on his staff. His knees trembled now that the danger had passed. Aaron joined him, grasping his arm in silent gratitude. Neither spoke. Words felt too small. Behind them lay a sea that held the graves of their enemies. Before them stretched a wilderness they did not yet understand. They were free, but freedom, like faith, was a road, not a destination. That night, as the camp settled beneath unfamiliar stars on the far side of the sea, small fires flickered once more. Families gathered close, sharing bread, sharing stories, sharing the quiet that comes only after terror had passed. Eliab lay wrapped in his blanket beside his parents, his eyelids heavy. "Mama," he murmured sleepily, "will God always make a way?" She smiled through tears. "Yes, my child, always a way." even when we cannot see it. Above them, the cloud of God's presence hovered gently, glowing faintly in the darkness. The sea whispered behind them, the desert breathed ahead of them, and somewhere beyond fear and wonder alike, the same God who parted the waters now watched over every resting soul. Fear had chased them to the edge of destruction. Faith had carried them through the heart of the impossible, and hope, quiet, steady, God-born, now settled like dew upon their hearts. The night grew still, the people slept, and the Lord, who had fought for them when they could not fight for themselves, kept watch through the slow turning of the stars.
The night Jacob wrestled the angel. The night was heavier than most nights in Jacob's life, a kind of thick, waiting darkness that felt like it was pressing against his skin as he stood near the shallow bend of the Jabbok River. The wind barely moved. The water glided by with the quiet hush of someone afraid to disturb him, and every sound around him seemed to know something was coming. Jacob felt it too. He had felt it the whole day, a tension that started in his chest the moment he saw the horizon in the distance and imagined the shape of a familiar face, his brother Esau, the man he had not seen in 20 long years, the man who once vowed to kill him. Jacob had sent gifts ahead, waves of servants, herds of goats, rams, camels, cows, donkeys, enough generosity to soften even a hardened heart. He had sent his wives and children across the river for safety. Yet even after all of that, the fear did not leave him. It stayed, sitting behind his ribs, whispering the same question over and over again. What if Esau still hates me? What if the past hasn't died? The night stretched out around him, quiet but restless, like someone breathing beside him that he couldn't see. He sat on a smooth stone near the riverbank, elbows resting on his knees, fingers locked together. For a moment, he watched the reflection of the moon ripple on the water. It looked like a fragile thing, light broken by movement. It reminded him of himself, a life fractured by choices, mistakes, blessings, promises, and consequences. The camp behind him had gone silent.
the last embers of the fire fading into a faint glow. The animals had settled. The children were asleep. Leah and Rachel were curled in separate tents across the river. Everything around him was resting, except him. Jacob felt like the whole world had gone still so it could watch what would happen to him tonight. He exhaled slowly and rubbed his face. "God of my father Abraham," he whispered to the night air. "God of my father Isaac, you said you would be with me. You said you would make my descendants like the sand of the sea. But right now, I feel alone." The words came out shaky, like they were carrying their own weight. He let them hang there in the dark, swallowed by the air, floating toward the heavens. He stood. Pacing helped him think. Each step crunched lightly on the dirt and grass, a rhythm for the thoughts swirling inside him. His mind replayed the past, the way he tricked Esau all those years ago. The bowl of stew, the blessing stolen with goatskins and whispered lies, the way Esau's voice cracked when he cried out, begging their father for another blessing. The memory still burned in his chest. He had spent years trying to outrun it, and now, suddenly, he couldn't run anymore. He crossed his arms tightly against himself, as if he could squeeze the fear out. The river whispered at his ankles. A chill crawled up his spine, and he turned around slowly, sensing movement. Not loud, not dramatic, just a presence. The kind of presence that makes every hair stand on end. Someone was there. Jacob's heart slammed once, hard enough to echo in his ears. A figure stood just at the edge of the dim moonlight. Not approaching, not speaking, just there, like it had been watching him for longer than he realized. Jacob straightened, muscles tightening instinctively. He didn't know who this person was. A stranger, an enemy, a thief, a scout sent by Esau, or something else entirely. The shape was tall, still, and completely unreadable. Jacob stepped forward. "Who are you?" The figure didn't answer. The night held its breath. Jacob felt something in him snap. Not fear, not anger, but that raw, desperate energy that comes when you've carried too many burdens for too long. He lunged. The stranger moved just as fast, catching Jacob's arm, twisting, countering as if anticipating every motion. And just like that, the quiet night shattered into a struggle. The two of them slammed into the dirt, rolling, gripping, forcing each other back and forth with sudden, terrifying strength. Jacob didn't know who he fought, but he fought with every ounce of power in him, like his entire life depended on this one moment. His breath came in sharp bursts. The ground scraped his legs. The chill of the river hit his back as they tumbled closer to the water. The stranger was strong, too strong, stronger than any human Jacob had ever faced. Yet Jacob refused to let go. Something inside him, a lifetime of striving, surviving, wrestling with people, life, fate, and even God, pushed him forward. His fingers locked around the stranger's arms, gripping like iron. His feet dug into the dirt for leverage. The fight wasn't loud. It was desperate. Heavy breath, sliding feet, impact after impact as they grappled in the dark. The moon watched silently. Minutes passed, then hours. Sweat dripped down Jacob's face. His arms trembled, his lungs burned, but every time the stranger pushed him down, Jacob pushed back harder. Every time he felt himself slipping, he tightened his grip. This wasn't just a fight. It was the physical form of every fear and regret he had tried to run from. He didn't even realize when his knees began to shake or when his breaths turned ragged. He only knew he couldn't release his hold. He wouldn't. The stranger shifted suddenly, trying to break free. Jacob drove forward and pinned him to the earth for a moment, panting above him. The stranger's face was still hidden in shadow. He could feel his own pulse hammering loudly in his ears. Then the stranger spoke. Just one sentence, calm, steady, almost patient. "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." Jacob froze. The voice wasn't threatening. It wasn't pleading. It was simply stating a fact, like time itself was moving and this moment couldn't last forever. But Jacob's hold only tightened. "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The stranger didn't immediately respond. Jacob could feel the air shift, like the atmosphere itself changed temperature. The weight of the moment settled heavier around them. The wind suddenly stirred for the first time in hours, brushing past them as if carrying echoes of another world. "What is your name?" the stranger asked. "Jacob," he said through clenched teeth. There was a pause, not long, but